Chapter 1. The 0 to 1 Mindset. Consider a question that is rarely asked in casual conversation, yet holds the key to the future. What important truth do very few people agree with you on? It sounds simple, almost like a playful interview riddle designed to test your cleverness. In reality, it is a psychological and intellectual gauntlet. Most people, when pressed, will offer a safe, consensus-driven opinion masquerading as a radical thought. They might say that our educational system is fundamentally broken, or that modern corporate culture is soul-crushing. These are not contrarian truths. They are complaints that a room full of people will readily nod along with. A true answer requires a rare mixture of intellectual clarity and raw courage. It demands that you stand entirely alone, pointing toward a reality that everyone else is either blind to or actively denying. To understand why this question matters, we have to look at the very nature of time and progress. The future is not just a sequence of calendar days waiting to unfold. If our society remains completely static for the next 100 years, then culturally and technologically, the future is still a century away. But if we undergo a profound, systemic transformation in the next 5 years, then the future is already sitting on our doorstep. The future is defined entirely by change, and that change must be rooted in how we perceive the present. When you find a profound truth that others reject, you are essentially looking through a crack in the wall of the current world, catching a glimpse of a different reality that has yet to be built. Progress itself moves along two completely different pathways, and confusing the two is the single greatest mistake an aspiring creator can make. The first path is horizontal progress, which is the act of copying things that already work. This is the movement from one to many. Imagine a rural community that has never seen a modern water filtration system. If an organization comes in and builds 100 standard filtration units based on an existing blueprint, that is horizontal progress. It is easy for us to envision because it is familiar, predictable, and reassuring. On a global scale, the word we use for this type of progress is globalization. We see it when developing regions copy the infrastructure, the consumer habits, and the industrial models of the developed world. It is the act of spreading an established template across the face of the earth. The second path is vertical progress, which is the act of doing something that has never been done before. This is the movement from 0 to 1. If you have a standard mechanical typewriter and you build 100 more, you are moving horizontally. But if you look at that typewriter, question its core mechanics, and invent a digital word processor, you have moved vertically. This is what we truly mean when we use the word technology. Technology is not limited to computers or silicon chips. It is any new, significantly better way of doing things. It is a fundamental shift in human capability, a moment where we rewrite the rules of what is possible. We live in an era that has fallen deeply in love with horizontal progress, almost to the exclusion of the vertical. We are told a comforting story about the inevitability of global convergence, that the poorer nations of the world will simply catch up to the richer ones by adopting their methods. But this story contains a hidden catastrophic flaw. In a world of strictly finite resources, globalization without new technology is completely unsustainable. If every household in a massive industrializing nation began consuming energy, water, and raw materials using the exact same mid-century tools that the Western world relies upon, the result would be an environmental and economic collapse, not a golden age of wealth. Spreading old, inefficient ways of generating wealth around the globe will result in universal devastation, not universal riches. We cannot simply replicate our way into a prosperous tomorrow. Without vertical, technological leaps, we will inevitably run out of room. New technology has never been an automatic byproduct of history, even though we often treat it as such. For the vast majority of human existence, our ancestors lived in static, zero-sum societies. Success meant conquering your neighbor and seizing their land or crops. Wealth was a fixed pie, and the only way to get a larger slice was to take it from someone else. True moments of creation were rare, fitful anomalies. Then, a few centuries ago, humanity experienced a sudden, unprecedented explosion of vertical progress, stretching from the dawn of the Industrial Revolution through the middle of the 20th century. Our grandparents grew up in an era that expected this vertical trajectory to continue forever. They genuinely believed we would soon have a 3-day work week, energy too cheap to monitor, and commercial vacations to distant planets. But something shifted. The relentless vertical progress of the past began to narrow. If you look closely at our modern world, the startling reality is that our surroundings are remarkably old. Aside from computers and communications, almost everything else, from transportation and construction to energy production and agriculture, looks fundamentally similar to how it did half a century ago. We are easily distracted by the glowing rectangles in our pockets. The rapid evolution of the smartphone blinds us to the fact that we are still stuck in traffic on the same highways, relying on the same power grids, and living within the same bureaucratic stagnation. We have accepted a world where we iterate rather than innovate. Our challenge today is to reignite the human capacity for miracles, and a miracle, properly understood, is simply any breakthrough that allows us to do vastly more with vastly less. This type of vertical thinking rarely emerges from massive, entrenched institutions. It is a fundamental truth of human organization that deep, revolutionary breakthroughs almost always come from small groups of people bound together by a singular sense of mission. It is incredibly difficult to develop genuinely new things in a massive bureaucracy. Large organizations are governed by risk aversion, internal politics, and the relentless need for consensus. In the most dysfunctional corporate hierarchies, signaling that you are doing work becomes a much better strategy for career advancement than actually achieving a breakthrough. Entrenched interests will always favor incremental alignment over bold experimentation. Conversely, a lone genius working in complete isolation faces their own insurmountable limits. A single individual might write a brilliant novel or paint a masterpiece, but they can never build an entirely new industry from scratch. True vertical progress requires a collective vehicle. A startup is not defined by its tax status or its venture funding. It is the largest group of people you can find who can be completely convinced of a specific, non-consensus plan to build a better future. The greatest asset of a small, focused team is not its speed or its lack of a dress code, but rather its spatial freedom to think. Being small allows you to step outside the tracks laid down by conventional wisdom and ask the fundamental questions that the rest of the world has forgotten. A new venture must be an intense exercise in first principles thinking. It requires that you look at the industry you wish to enter, discard all the received ideas, best practices, and formulas that are taught in business schools, and rebuild your understanding of value from the absolute ground up. You cannot move from 0 to 1 by accepting the world as it is given to you. You must look at the landscape with fresh, unclouded eyes, recognize the massive spaces where everyone else sees a crowded wall, and have the quiet courage to begin building what is missing. Chapter 2. Escaping the Madness of Crowds. To find a hidden truth, it is often easiest to start with a preliminary inquiry. What does everybody actually agree on? Madness, as the old philosophical adage goes, is exceedingly rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, and entire historical eras, it is the absolute rule. Whenever a popular belief is revealed to be a collective delusion, we witness the bursting of a cultural or economic bubble. Yet, the psychological distortions caused by these upheavals do not vanish when the markets crash. They linger for decades, quietly shaping and paralyzing how an entire generation thinks about innovation, risk, and the future. To step outside the crowd and think clearly for yourself, you must first unlearn the trauma of the past. Consider the final years of the 20th century, an era often remembered through a haze of golden nostalgia as a time of uninterrupted prosperity and boundless digital optimism. The reality on the ground, however, was far more anxious and fractured. The decade opened with global instability, a grinding domestic recession, and a painful, protracted shift away from industrial manufacturing toward a service-based economy. Cultural movements were defined by a profound sense of cynicism and malaise, rather than hope or confidence. The technological sector itself felt stagnant, seemingly losing its competitive edge to overseas manufacturers. To the average person, the world of computing felt provincial and highly specialized. Everything changed when the digital realm finally became accessible to ordinary individuals. The introduction of the first user-friendly interface for browsing the web ignited a gold rush of unprecedented proportions. Suddenly, companies with zero profits, minimal revenue, and nothing more than a digital address were listing on public stock exchanges and seeing their valuations double overnight. Skeptics who pointed out that standard financial metrics were being completely ignored were dismissed as relics of the old world. The collective consciousness had decided that standard profitability was a pedestrian concept. Page views and digital traffic were the only metrics that mattered for the new economy. This intense mania was not born out of pure, unadulterated greed, but rather out of a desperate, indirect proof. Investors and entrepreneurs looked around the globe and realized that nothing else was working. Massive financial crises were sweeping through emerging markets, breaking the backs of highly leveraged economies. Prominent international currencies were launching to widespread apathy and steadily losing their value. Corporate giants were struggling to adapt to the early pressures of globalization. In a world where the old way of doing business was visibly cracking, the digital frontier became the single, solitary hope for a better future. Because the world desperately needed a miracle, people chose to believe that any digital venture, no matter how flimsy its structure, was that miracle. The height of this mania was a surreal spectacle of economic inversion. Legions of professionals abandoned stable, well-paying careers to join, or found digital ventures with alarming casualness. It was an environment where planning an initial public offering from a living room before a company was even formally incorporated was considered a routine business strategy. The most celebrated ventures openly embraced an anti-business model, deliberately losing massive amounts of capital as they scaled, treating severe financial losses as a badge of honor and a necessary investment in a brighter tomorrow. In such a climate, acting with traditional sanity began to look like an eccentric character flaw. When the music finally stopped, the correction was brutal and absolute. Valuations cratered, trillions of dollars of paper wealth evaporated, and a vast graveyard of ambitious digital ventures was left in the wake of the collapse. The public and the financial establishment did not view this merely as a standard market correction. They interpreted it as a divine judgment against technological optimism itself. The era of bold, long-term thinking was officially declared over, replaced by an era of profound intellectual humility and systemic risk aversion. From the ashes of this crash, entrepreneurs and investors extracted 4 massive foundational lessons that still quietly govern modern corporate strategy. First, they learned to make only small, incremental advances. Grand visions were seen as the toxic fuel that inflated the bubble, so humility became the supreme virtue. Anyone who claimed to have a grand plan to change the world was instantly viewed with intense suspicion. Small, cautious, iterative steps were deemed the only safe path forward. Second, they learned that a company must stay lean and flexible. In practice, lean became a euphemism for remaining completely unplanned. Aspiring creators were told that long-term planning was an arrogant, inflexible delusion. Instead, entrepreneurship was reframed as a process of agnostic experimentation. You should simply launch a rudimentary product, listen to customer feedback, change course constantly, and see what happens to evolve naturally. Third, they learned that you must focus on improving upon the existing competition. Trying to create a brand new market prematurely was viewed as a fool's errand. The only way to prove you had a viable business was to target a market that already existed, building your enterprise by making marginal improvements on recognizable products offered by successful rivals. Fourth, they learned to focus entirely on the product rather than sales. Advertising and aggressive salesmanship were branded as wasteful, manipulative relics of the bubble era. If a product was truly exceptional, it should sell itself through organic, viral growth. Distribution became a secondary afterthought, subordinated to engineering. These 4 lessons have hardened into absolute dogma across the modern entrepreneurial ecosystem. To question them is to invite immediate ridicule. And yet, if you look at the world from first principles rather than fear, the exact opposite principles are far more likely to be true. It is far better to risk boldness than to settle for triviality. A flawed plan is infinitely better than no plan at all. Fiercely competitive markets destroy profitability and strip away long-term survival, and sales matters just as much as the underlying product. The great crash of the early millennium was indeed a peak of collective insanity, but more importantly, it was also a rare peak of cultural clarity. For a brief historical window, people looked far into the future, recognized the massive volume of valuable new technology required to get humanity there safely, and judged themselves fully capable of creating it. We still desperately need that technology today, but we cannot build it if we remain trapped by the dogmas born out of past traumas. Escaping the madness of crowds does not mean reactionary defiance. It means having the clarity to think for yourself, recognizing that the most contrarian path of all is to abandon past failures and reclaim the courage to build according to a grand design. Chapter 3. The Monopoly Mandate. There is a fundamental question at the heart of every business, yet it is one that most aspiring creators completely fail to ask. What valuable company is nobody building? It is a deceptively difficult puzzle because creating value is not the same thing as capturing it. You can build something that benefits millions of people, changes the fabric of daily life, and generates immense wealth for society, while simultaneously driving your own enterprise into bankruptcy. Imagine a massive, globe-spanning logistics company. They operate fleets of cargo ships, thousands of trucks, and immense warehouses. They move millions of tons of goods every single day, effectively keeping the arteries of global commerce pumping. They create hundreds of billions of dollars in societal value. Yet, because they compete in a crowded market with dozens of other logistics giants, their profit margins are razor-thin. A slight increase in global fuel prices or a minor labor dispute can completely wipe out their earnings for the year. Now, imagine a single software company that has built a proprietary algorithm for searching digital information. They do not maintain physical supply chains or manufacture heavy machinery, but because they are the sole, undisputed gateway that billions of people must pass through to find what they are looking for online, they capture a massive percentage of the value they create. The logistics companies are locked in a daily war for survival. The search algorithm company stands entirely alone, accumulating vast wealth. To understand this dynamic, we have to look at the two absolute extremes of the business world: perfect competition and monopoly. In the realm of traditional economics, perfect competition is heralded as the ultimate ideal. In a perfectly competitive market, multiple firms offer identical, undifferentiated products. Because no single company has any real power or distinct advantage, the market dictates the price. If there is a sudden surge of profit to be made, new competitors will instantly flood the space, increase the supply of the product, drive prices down to the floor, and ruthlessly eliminate the very profits that attracted them in the first place. In the long run, under the brutal laws of perfect competition, no company makes any meaningful economic profit. They are all simply treading water. The absolute opposite of this state is monopoly. A true monopoly does not have to worry about playing by the rules of a crowded market because it owns the market. It offers a product or service so profoundly superior or so radically unique that no other firm can offer even a close substitute. Because it faces no threat of being undercut, a monopoly has the power to set its own prices and maximize its own profits. We have been taught by popular culture and political rhetoric that capitalism and competition are synonymous, that they are the exact same thing. But in reality, capitalism and competition are total opposites. Capitalism is premised on the accumulation of capital. Perfect competition is a mechanism that violently destroys capital. If your goal is to build an enduring, highly valuable enterprise, you must refuse to build an undifferentiated commodity business. You must seek a monopoly. The reason this is so hard for people to grasp is that both competitors and monopolists lie about their true nature, creating a massive optical illusion in the market. Monopolists lie because they want to protect themselves. They know that openly bragging about their complete dominance will invite government scrutiny, regulatory audits, and public backlash. So they go to great lengths to conceal their monopoly status by artificially inflating the definition of their market. A company that utterly dominates global digital advertising will humbly claim that they are actually just a tiny player in the massive worldwide technology sector, competing against manufacturers of mobile phones, self-driving cars, and consumer electronics. By defining their market as an impossibly broad ocean, they make themselves look like a harmless, vulnerable fish. Non-monopolists tell the exact opposite lie. They are absolutely desperate to convince themselves and their investors that they are in a league of their own, so they define their market incredibly narrowly. Imagine an entrepreneur deciding to open a boutique fitness studio that combines high-intensity interval training with heated yoga. They look around their specific neighborhood and confidently declare, "No one else is doing heated high-intensity yoga in this exact zip code. We will own the entire market!" But this is a fatal delusion. They are not competing in the hyper-specific market of heated high-intensity yoga within a 10-block radius. They are competing in the brutal, unforgiving, and universally crowded fitness market, fighting for the same exact hours of a consumer's day as traditional gyms, home workout programs, and outdoor running clubs. The fatal temptation is to describe your market so narrowly that you dominate it by definition, blinding yourself to the fierce competition that will ultimately bleed your margins dry. Why then do so many brilliant, capable people willingly march into the meat grinder of fierce competition? It is because competition is not merely an economic condition, it is a deeply ingrained ideology. From the moment we are children, our educational system trains us to view the world as a hyper-competitive tournament. Uniquely talented students with vastly different passions are forced to sit in the same classrooms, take the same standardized tests, and fight for the exact same grades. As they ascend the academic ladder, the competition becomes even more intense, stripping away their individual dreams and funneling them into identical, prestigious career tracks. By the time they enter the professional world, these fiercely intelligent individuals have been transformed into conformists, desperately fighting against their own peers for a standard badge of success. We preach competition, we internalize its necessity, and as a result, we trap ourselves within it, failing to realize that the harder we compete, the less we actually gain. We have a romanticized view of human conflict, believing that people fight because they are fundamentally different. But the reality of business is tragic precisely because rivals are almost always identical. Imagine two brilliant software engineers who launch separate companies in the same year, building digital logistics platforms. Initially, they are independent and prosperous, but as they grow, they begin to obsess over each other. They stop looking at the future and start looking across the street. If one introduces a new dashboard feature, the other copies it perfectly a week later. If one lowers their enterprise subscription fee by 10%, the other slashes theirs by 15%. They begin poaching each other's staff, running attack advertisements, and spending all their precious capital trying to slightly outmaneuver their rival. The tragedy is that their fierce rivalry causes them to completely lose sight of why they started their companies in the first place. Their products become indistinguishable. Their profit margins plummet to zero. Eventually, they exhaust their resources entirely, leaving the door wide open for a third, completely unrelated company to sweep in with a genuinely new innovation that renders them both obsolete. The competitive ecosystem pushes human beings toward ruthlessness, exhaustion, or death. When you are locked in a daily desperate struggle for survival, you cannot afford to care about the well-being of your employees, the ethical footprint of your supply chain, or the long-term impact of your product on the wider world. Survival consumes all available oxygen. A monopoly is entirely different. Because a monopoly is free from the brutal friction of daily warfare, it possesses the ultimate luxury, the space to plan for the future. Monopolies can afford to treat their people exceptionally well. They can afford to finance massive, ambitious research projects that will not yield returns for a decade. We are taught to fear monopolies, viewing them as massive toll collectors that artificially restrict supply to extort the public. But in a dynamic, ever-changing world, creative monopolies do not restrict choices. They expand them. They introduce entirely new categories of abundance into the world, offering solutions that never existed before. The history of human progress is not a history of perfectly competitive markets reaching a state of static equilibrium. It is a history of better, more innovative monopolies systematically replacing the incumbents of the past. If you want to leave a lasting mark on the world, you must unlearn the ideology of competition. You must stop trying to beat the crowd at their own game, and instead find a game that only you can play. Chapter 4. Architecting Your Own Luck. There is a profound and endless debate that runs through the heart of the business world, dividing aspiring creators and seasoned veterans alike. Is monumental success primarily the result of brilliant calculation, or is it simply a matter of extraordinary luck? If you ask some of the most celebrated figures of our time, they will often perform a strategic humility. They will attribute their sprawling empires to a fortunate planetary alignment, a lucky break, or the sheer biological lottery of being born in the right era. But we must look past this performative modesty. If success were truly just a chaotic roll of the dice, we would not see the exact same individuals repeatedly building massively impactful multi-billion-dollar enterprises from scratch. When someone constructs a revolutionary business, steps away, and then does it all over again in a completely different industry, it shatters the myth of random chance. Success is not an accident. To understand how you can architect your own success, you must first examine how you view the future itself. Every human being operates under a specific psychological framework regarding what tomorrow will bring. Many people look at the horizon and see a hazily uncertain fog. They believe the future is entirely driven by random forces beyond their control, so they abandon any attempt to master it. This is the mindset of the indefinite optimist. An indefinite optimist expects things to magically get better over time, but they have absolutely no concrete plan to make it happen. They navigate life by trying to keep every possible door open. They hoard diverse credentials, build scattered resumes, and spread their energy across a dozen different pursuits, hoping that one of these lottery tickets will eventually pay off. The alternative is the path of the definite optimist. A definite optimist believes that the future will be better than the present only because they are going to painstakingly design and build it. They do not worship at the altar of optionality. Instead of striving to be marginally adequate at 100 different things, they determine the single most valuable thing to do, and they dedicate their entire existence to mastering it. They operate with the conviction that the future is a definitive architecture waiting to be constructed, not a random breeze waiting to blow them in a favorable direction. When you adopt an indefinite lottery ticket mentality in business, it manifests as a dangerous, fatal obsession with the short term. Aspiring creators who lack a definite vision often become mesmerized by shallow metrics. They chase weekly active user counts, brief spikes in quarterly revenue, and the fleeting dopamine hit of a viral marketing campaign. They celebrate rapid early growth without ever stopping to ask the single most terrifying question, will this enterprise even exist a decade from now? The mathematical reality of a genuinely great business is that its true financial worth is not based on what it earns today. The value of any company is the sum of all the capital it will generate far into the future. Imagine an old legacy print publication. It might be highly profitable this exact minute, but its foundation is crumbling and its cash flows will inevitably dry up as the world moves on. Now imagine a revolutionary digital platform that is currently losing money because it is pouring every ounce of its energy into building an entirely new technological ecosystem. The legacy business is a fading ember, while the digital platform holds massive value because its profits will explode 10 or 15 years down the line. But you cannot unlock that distant future unless you have engineered your company to survive and dominate over the long haul. Endurance requires a deliberate architecture. Every lasting monopoly shares a combination of specific, defensible traits, and the most critical of these is proprietary technology. To escape the gravity of competition, your creation cannot be a mere 20% improvement over the status quo. It must be at least 10 times better than the closest alternative. Think of a deeply frustrating process, like an independent contractor waiting 90 agonizing days for a paper invoice to clear through a labyrinth of corporate approvals. If you invent a digital infrastructure that securely verifies and transfers those funds in exactly 3 seconds, you have not just made a marginal upgrade, you have created a quantum leap in utility. A 10-fold improvement is so profoundly superior that it ceases to be a competition. It becomes a completely new category. Beyond the technology itself, your architecture must harness the extraordinary power of network effects. This is the phenomenon where a product becomes inherently more valuable to its users, simply because more people are using it. But there is a brilliant counterintuitive paradox hidden within this concept. To build a massive world-spanning network, you must begin with a remarkably small market. You do not launch a revolutionary communication tool by trying to convince the entire planet to adopt it on day one. You launch it for a hyper-specific, highly concentrated group of people who share a common pain point. Picture a digital marketplace built exclusively for the few thousand people worldwide who obsessively restore antique maritime navigational tools. It sounds absurdly small. But if your platform solves their unique problems perfectly, you will capture that entire market within weeks. Once you become the undisputed epicenter for that tight-knit community, you have established an unbreakable beachhead. From there, you slowly and methodically expand into adjacent markets, adding vintage timepieces, then historical artifacts, moving outward in concentric circles until you are the general store for the world. As you scale, you enjoy the tremendous advantage of fixed costs spreading over an ever-expanding base, allowing your margins to widen while your reach becomes infinite. These underlying mechanics of proprietary technology, initial niche dominance, and massive scale will eventually manifest on the surface as a powerful brand. But a brand without deep structural substance is a dangerous illusion. You cannot design a sleek logo, hire a luxury marketing agency, throw a lavish launch party, and expect to build an empire. The polish of a brand only works when it is reinforcing the undeniable gravity of a true monopoly. When you combine these elements, you stop worrying about the frantic scramble to be the first to enter a market. Being the first mover is merely a tactical advantage, and often a perilous one, as pioneers frequently end up with arrows in their backs. Your ultimate goal is to be the last mover. You want to survey the landscape, understand the deep architecture of where the world is going, and make the final, definitive leap in your specific market. You must build a solution so elegant, so heavily fortified by technology and network effects, that no one else can ever follow you. To achieve this, you must permanently discard the belief that life is a game of chance. You must refuse the temptation to keep your options open. The future will not just happen to you if you are brave enough to design it, commit to it, and build it with your own hands. Chapter 5. The Power of Hidden Truths. There is a fundamental mathematical reality quietly governing our universe, yet it is so massive and pervasive that it hides in plain sight. It is the law of exponential growth, a force that dictates that a tiny minority of causes will eventually produce the vast majority of all results. We see this in nature, where a handful of the most devastating earthquakes are exponentially more powerful than millions of smaller tremors combined. We see it in human geography, where a few megacities dwarf the economic output of thousands of smaller towns. And it operates with ruthless efficiency in the world of business, where a singular, monopolistic enterprise will inevitably capture more wealth than millions of undifferentiated competitors fighting for scraps. This uneven, highly skewed distribution of outcomes is the law of the universe, but we are actively trained to ignore it. From the moment we enter the educational system, we are taught to worship at the altar of diversification. We are handed the folk wisdom that we should never put all our eggs in one basket, a philosophy that frames scattered dabbling as a source of immense strength. We are encouraged to assemble a portfolio of exotic and minor skills, joining dozens of extracurricular clubs, taking a dizzying array of unrelated classes, and padding our resumes until we become flawlessly well-rounded. The implicit promise of this institutionalized homogenization is that it does not really matter what you choose to do with your life as long as you do it relatively well and keep all your options completely open. But this is a devastating lie. It absolutely matters what you choose to do. When you look at the highest tiers of professional investing, you see this exact same flaw magnified by billions of dollars. Many investors build massive, highly diversified portfolios, scattering their capital across dozens of mediocre companies, praying that the sheer volume of their bets will insulate them from the unpredictable chaos of the future. They assume that bad companies will fail, average ones will stay flat, and a few good ones will provide a modest return. But this approach almost always guarantees failure. The stark, hidden secret of venture investing is that the single best investment in a successful fund will eventually equal or completely outperform the entire rest of the fund combined. If an investor spends their time trying to hedge their bets rather than relentlessly hunting for the one rare enterprise that can scale exponentially, they will miss the future entirely. Life is not a diversified portfolio. You cannot run dozens of companies simultaneously, hoping that one of them miraculously catches fire. More importantly, you cannot diversify your own existence by keeping a dozen equally plausible careers in ready reserve. Time is the ultimate non-renewable capital, and every individual is unavoidably an investor of their own lifespan. Imagine a highly capable professional who decides to hedge their career by working as a corporate accountant by day, taking law classes at night, and trying to launch a small retail business on the weekends. They are exhausted, spread incredibly thin, and ultimately mediocre in every single arena. They have successfully minimized their risk, but they have also mathematically eliminated any chance of achieving something profound. To build something monumental, you must relentlessly focus on a singular pursuit, but only after you have thought deeply about whether that pursuit will actually be valuable a decade from now. To commit your life to a singular exponential pursuit, you must first believe that there are still valuable things left in the world to discover. You must believe in secrets. A secret is a specific type of knowledge that sits precisely between two extremes. On one side are conventions, which are the easy, universally accepted truths that we teach to children. On the other side are mysteries, which are impossibly difficult phenomena that no amount of human effort can currently unravel. In the middle lies the secret, something that is incredibly important and entirely unknown, a problem that is remarkably hard to solve but still ultimately doable. Every great company is necessarily built upon a secret that the rest of the world has missed. Yet, the vast majority of people walk through life acting as though there are absolutely no secrets left to find. We suffer from a collective loss of faith in the frontier. Because there are no blank spaces left on the physical map of the world, we assume that the intellectual and technological maps have been fully charted as well. This widespread disbelief in secrets is driven by four powerful social forces. The first is incrementalism, the slow, methodical conditioning we receive in school that teaches us to only take tiny, highly predictable steps forward. The second is risk aversion, the paralyzing fear of dedicating your life to an unpopular idea because being lonely and wrong is too much for the human ego to bear. The third is complacency, the comfortable stagnation of social elites who would rather collect safe rents on the achievements of the past than venture into the unknown. Finally, there is the illusion of flatness, the discouraging belief that in a hyper-connected, globalized world, someone far smarter and more resourced would have already discovered your idea if it were actually any good. If you can overcome these paralyzing mental blocks, you will realize that the world is overflowing with hidden truths waiting to yield to a relentless searcher. These truths generally fall into two distinct categories: secrets of nature and secrets about people. Finding natural secrets requires studying the undiscovered physical mechanics of the universe, like unlocking a new way to generate clean power or curing a metabolic disease. But secrets about people are vastly underappreciated and equally powerful. Human secrets are the truths that people either do not understand about themselves or actively hide from the world because they are forbidden or socially taboo. Consider a brilliant young architect who observes the modern corporate workspace. The established convention, universally praised by management consultants, is the open plan office, touted for its supposed ability to foster spontaneous collaboration and transparency. But the architect looks closer and discovers a massive human secret. Everyone actually hates it. The employees are secretly overwhelmed by the constant noise, their productivity is fractured by endless interruptions, and they quietly despise the lack of privacy, even as they smile and nod in company meetings. They are hiding their true feelings to conform to the corporate culture. By recognizing this hidden human truth, the architect can abandon the crowded market of open-plan design and build a wildly successful firm dedicated to engineering spaces that prioritize deep, uninterrupted focus and psychological sanctuary. When you stumble upon a profound secret, whether it is an unmapped law of physics or a hidden human behavior, you face a critical choice. Do you broadcast your discovery to the entire world, or do you keep it entirely to yourself? Both extremes are deeply flawed. If your belief is truly unconventional, sharing it indiscriminately will only invite misunderstanding, ridicule, and coordinated opposition from the establishment. But keeping it entirely to yourself means you will never have the leverage or the manpower required to bring your vision into reality. The optimal path is a golden mean between telling nobody and telling everybody. You must share your secret only with the specific people you absolutely need to help you build it, and not a single soul more. When you share a profound, world-altering truth with a carefully selected group of individuals, they cease to be mere employees or colleagues. They become fellow conspirators. The greatest enterprises in history were not simply businesses. They were quiet, fiercely dedicated conspiracies to change the fabric of the world from the inside out. Finding the secret is the spark, but building the conspiracy is the fire. Chapter 6. Blood, Alignment, and Culture. Every monumental enterprise is uniquely tailored to its specific purpose. But there is an unyielding, hidden law that governs them all from the shadows. A new venture that is deeply flawed at its foundation cannot be repaired. The earliest moments of any creation are qualitatively different from everything that follows. They are periods of extraordinary plasticity, where the core rules are established, the baseline trajectory is set, and the genetic code of the organization is permanently stamped into its structure. If you select the wrong partners, invite the wrong voices into your governing room, or choose the wrong incentives for your team, those errors will harden like concrete. It may take a catastrophic crisis on the level of total bankruptcy to even attempt to fix them, and by then, it is almost always too late. As a creator, your absolute first responsibility is to engineer a flawless foundation. This foundational architecture begins with the deepest psychological alignment of your core team. Choosing a co-founder is not an administrative box to check. It is an emotional and structural commitment that mirrors a marriage. In the earliest days of a venture, optimism flows effortlessly, and it feels deeply unromantic to speak soberly about what could go wrong. But if the individuals leading an enterprise develop irreconcilable differences in their values, their timelines, or their definitions of success, the venture itself becomes the innocent victim. Imagine two aspiring creators who decide to launch a new enterprise together after meeting briefly at a professional networking mixer. One is a highly technical, obsessive researcher driven by a desire to invent a radical new form of energy storage. The other is a hyper-focused corporate professional who is simply eager to jump on the latest economic trend and achieve a rapid financial exit. At the start, their complementary skill sets look perfect on paper. But as soon as the first major obstacle arrives, their misalignment will tear the foundation apart. The researcher will want to sink all remaining capital into a long-term engineering pivot, while the business professional will demand that they package their current half-baked solution for a quick sale. Their communication breaks down, their board splits, and the company dissolves into bitter litigation. When you evaluate an enterprise, you must look past their technical capabilities and examine their prehistory. Founders must share a deep, proven history of working together before they formally commit to building a future. Otherwise, they are simply rolling dice in the dark. To ensure that this initial alignment stretches across the entire organization as it expands, you must establish absolute structural clarity. Human organizations are prone to a specific type of autoimmune disease where internal factions begin fighting each other for status and resources, completely forgetting the external mission. To prevent this, a definite creator must maintain a razor-sharp distinction between three fundamental concepts: ownership, possession, and control. Ownership is the legal allocation of an enterprise's equity, the question of who owns the long-term capital. Possession is the day-to-day operation of the company, the question of who actually sits at the desk, makes the managerial decisions, and executes the strategy. Control is the formal governance of the enterprise's affairs, the question of who populates the board of directors and maintains the ultimate authority to fire the executives or steer the ship. In a perfectly designed startup, these three forces are woven together to maximize alignment. The financial upside of ownership attracts long-term commitment. The autonomy of possession empowers creators to move with lightning speed, and the oversight of control ensures that the company remains accountable to its grand design. But when these functions become completely fractured and misaligned, you get the agonizing stagnation of a massive, unaccountable bureaucracy. You can witness this structural nightmare in any legacy corporate giant or government institution. The public or the passive shareholders may technically own the entity, but their ownership is a complete fiction. The entrenched, mid-level executives who manage the operations enjoy a very real day-to-day possession of their petty powers. Meanwhile, the massive, oversized board of directors exercises a nominal control that is too slow, too disconnected, and too bloated to affect any real change. The managers are incentivized to protect their massive salaries, minimize risks, and focus entirely on short-term quarterly metrics rather than investing in a bold, decades-long plan. In the boardroom of a new venture, less is infinitely more. A small, hyper-focused board of 3 individuals is the absolute ideal, and it should never exceed 5 members unless the company enters the public markets. Unknowing observers often look at a massive non-profit or a highly visible public entity with 30 prestigious individuals on its board and think, Look how many brilliant minds are guiding this organization. But in reality, a massive board is a deliberate mechanism to ensure that no effective oversight ever occurs. It serves as a decorative smokescreen, allowing a single micro-dictator at the top to run the organization with absolute free rein. If you want your board to be an active, effective instrument of long-term strategy, you must keep it small, select every single member with extreme precision, and ensure that their incentives are perfectly aligned with the future of the company. This demand for absolute alignment means that you must enforce a binary standard of commitment. You are either entirely on the bus or you are completely off the bus. Everyone involved with your venture must be involved full-time, bound by the exact same daily realities. The moment you begin relying on external consultants, part-time advisors, or isolated remote freelancers who do not own equity or share the daily burdens of the office, misalignment creeps into the walls. External actors are naturally biased to extract short-term value from your company today, rather than helping you build an architecture that will endure for 20 years. To foster this deep commitment, a creator must also understand that cash is not king. High cash salaries are a toxic vector for an early-stage venture. If an executive or an early employee demands a massive corporate salary, it reveals that they are more interested in claiming value from the company as it currently exists than investing their life to create new value in the future. A cash paycheck offers pure, immediate optionality. Once it lands in a bank account, it can be spent anywhere on anything. Low executive compensation sets an unyielding cultural standard. When a leader takes a modest baseline salary and ties their entire personal fortune to their equity, they send a definitive signal to the entire room. Our survival and our wealth depend entirely on the realization of our long-term mission. Equity is the single most powerful tool for human alignment, but it must be allocated with extreme care and absolute discretion. Handing out perfectly equal shares to an early team is a lazy, dangerous mistake that feels fair but is fundamentally unjust. Every individual brings vastly different opportunity costs, distinct talents, and wildly varying levels of responsibility to a venture. Granting asymmetric equity is necessary, but it will inevitably trigger intense comparison and toxic resentment if the details are laid bare. Therefore, the explicit details of ownership must remain a closely guarded secret within the foundation. When you get these foundational elements right, the marriage of the founders, the absolute clarity of roles, the lean board, and the long-term pool of equity, you create something far more powerful than a mere business. You create a distinct, highly functional culture. Modern corporate managers think you can manufacture a company culture by hiring human resource consultants to write mission statements, or by decorating an office with beanbag chairs and ping-pong tables. This is an absurd illusion. No company has a culture. Every company is a culture. A true culture is simply what a hyper-aligned team of individuals looks like from the inside out when they are on an intense, uncompromising mission to build a different future. On the outside, the members of a great venture should look completely different from the surrounding world, yet identical to each other. They are a distinct tribe, instantly recognizable by their shared language, their singular focus, and their total devotion to the goal. On the inside, however, their day-to-day work must be sharply distinguished. The most brilliant managerial strategy is to ensure that every single person in the enterprise is responsible for doing exactly one unique thing. When roles are fluid and poorly defined, colleagues will naturally begin competing against each other for the same status, the same responsibilities, and the same praise. Internal competition is a violent autoimmune disease that will destroy a startup from within long before an external competitor ever has the chance to strike. By eliminating internal competition and aligning everyone toward an external secret, you extend the creative magic of the founding moment indefinitely. Chapter 7. The Invisible Art of Distribution. We live in a world that is deeply obsessed with the act of creation, yet remarkably blind to the mechanics of transmission. There is a widespread, almost religious belief among engineers, designers, and artisans that if you build something genuinely spectacular, the world will automatically march a path to your door. This is the classic myth of the superior product, the comforting delusion that quality alone is an active distribution mechanism. But it is a dangerous lie. Customers will not come simply because you have built a masterpiece. You have to painstakingly engineer the bridge that connects your creation to the market, and that work is often far more difficult and far more sophisticated than the underlying engineering itself. To understand why distribution is so frequently misunderstood, we must look at the deep cultural divide between the technical mind and the soul of the salesman. Individuals trained in hard, deterministic disciplines like computer programming, mathematics, or structural engineering are accustomed to absolute transparency. In their world, a solution either works flawlessly or it fails completely. Surface appearances do not matter. The code either compiles or it breaks. Sales is the absolute opposite. Sales is an orchestrated, deeply nuanced campaign to shift human perception and change surface appearances without necessarily altering the underlying physical reality. To a technical mind, this can easily look like superficial showboating, if not outright dishonesty. When an engineer looks at a team of enterprise dealmakers laughing on the phone with a client or spending 2 hours over a lavish corporate lunch, they quietly assume that no real work is being done. What they systematically miss is that it takes an immense amount of calculated, grueling effort to make sales look entirely effortless. The greatest salesmen are not the loud, aggressive characters we mock in popular culture. Those are merely the clumsy amateurs. The true masters of distribution are consummate actors whose art is completely hidden in plain sight. They persuade you so elegantly and align their product with your desires so perfectly that you walk away believing you made up your own mind entirely unprompted. If you have invented an entirely new product but fail to invent an effective, repeatable way to sell it, you do not have a business. You have a tragedy. Your distribution model must be governed by an unyielding mathematical relationship between two foundational metrics: customer lifetime value and customer acquisition cost. Customer lifetime value is the total net profit your enterprise will capture over the entire duration of your relationship with a single consumer. Customer acquisition cost is the average amount of capital you must spend across advertising, sales personnel, and marketing infrastructure to secure that single customer. The profit must always dwarf the cost. Depending on where your product sits on this financial spectrum, you must select one of 4 distinct distribution frameworks. The first framework is the complex sale, which operates at the absolute highest rungs of commerce. This is the realm where individual transaction sizes are measured in millions or tens of millions of dollars. At this level, every single deal requires months or even years of intense personal cultivation, navigating labyrinthine corporate hierarchies and intense political landscape. Imagine a company that has developed a revolutionary satellite-based radar system capable of predicting subterranean structural shifts for deep-core mining operations. At $10 million per contract, you cannot simply hire a traditional sales force to cold call mining executives, nor can you run advertisements in trade magazines. The buyers at this level want to look directly into the eyes of the principal creator. They want to know that the leader of the enterprise is personally committed to their operational survival. Complex sales models do not rely on standard salespeople. They rely on the founder performing the role of a master diplomat. Growth here feels agonizingly slow, perhaps yielding only 2 or 3 major reference clients in the first few years. But if you secure those initial beachheads, you can slowly and methodically expand your reach, leveraging your proven success to lock down an unbreakable enterprise monopoly. The second framework is the personal sale, which handles transaction sizes ranging from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Here, the founder can no longer execute every transaction personally. The challenge shifts from individual diplomacy to structural engineering. You must build a modest, highly trained sales team that can systematically move your product to a broad institutional audience. Consider an enterprise that builds a specialized digital scheduling and compliance infrastructure for large regional hospital networks. The hospital administrators do not yet realize they need this tool because they are accustomed to legacy paper systems, but their daily operational friction is immense. A personal sales representative does not approach the hospital president demanding a multi-million-dollar top-down mandate. Instead, they find a small, hyper-stressed department like the pediatric residency clinic and convince the director to run a low-cost, isolated trial. Once the system runs flawlessly for 6 months, eliminating scheduling errors and cutting administrative compliance time in half, the representative leverages that internal success to expand to the emergency department, then the surgery wings, moving outward until the entire hospital network runs exclusively on their software. The absolute deadliest trap in the business world is the distribution doldrums, the dead zone that sits precisely between personal sales and traditional marketing. Imagine you have built an exceptional software application designed to help small, independent convenience store owners optimize their retail inventory and track expiration dates. You price the service at a reasonable $1,000 per year. At this price point, you face a catastrophic structural bottleneck. You do not have the financial margins to send an actual human representative to sit down and pitch every single convenience store owner in the country. The travel expenses and payroll would wipe out your revenue instantly. Yet, at the same time, traditional mass media advertising is too broad and entirely inefficient to convince a busy independent retailer to part with $1,000 online. The product is trapped in a distribution vacuum where no viable channel exists to reach the customer. Thousands of brilliant products die in this exact zone because their creators failed to realize that distribution must be baked into the design of the product itself. The third framework is traditional marketing and advertising, which works beautifully for low-priced, mass-market products that lack any natural method of viral transmission. This is the realm of the great megaphone. Because your individual transaction size is modest, you must rely on television commercials, digital campaigns, and striking visual design to embed subtle, long-term impressions in the minds of millions of consumers, driving them to adopt your solution over time. The final and most powerful framework is viral marketing, the holy grail of exponential growth. A product is truly viral if its absolute core functionality naturally compels its users to invite their friends to become users as well. Think of a digital payment mechanism or a secure communications tool. Every single time a consumer transfers capital to a colleague or sends an encrypted message to a partner, they are automatically exposing a new individual to the network and inviting them into the ecosystem. The ideal viral loop must be completely frictionless and lightning quick. If you can create a chain reaction where every new participant naturally draws in more than one additional person, your user base will double every few weeks, creating a magnificent wave of non-linear growth that completely locks out the competition. The counterintuitive truth that every creator must memorize is that distribution follows a strict power law of its own. You do not succeed by trying to master all of these channels simultaneously, by hiring a few salespeople, running a handful of digital advertisements, and slapping a viral referral button onto your dashboard as an afterthought. The kitchen sink approach to sales is a definitive recipe for bankruptcy. Most failed companies do not fail because they have a bad product. They fail because they have zero workable distribution channels. If you can get just one solitary distribution channel to work with absolute monopolistic efficiency, you have a spectacular business. If you try for several but fail to nail one, you are finished. Look around your operation with radical clarity. If you do not see a definitive, expertly engineered sales architecture running beneath your product, then you are not an observer of the market. You are the salesperson and you are running out of time. Chapter 8. The Human-Machine Symbiosis. Today, the rapid advancement of digital processing power has led to a profound collective anxiety. As computing technology scales at a breathtaking pace, people look at the horizon and wonder if there will be anything left for human beings to do in 30 years. We are terrified that software is simply going to consume the world and replace us. This fear has paralyzed our imagination, splitting society into two opposing camps. Those who violently resist technological progress in a desperate bid to protect jobs, and those who gleefully anticipate a future where human labor is entirely eradicated by intelligent automation. Both camps are operating under the exact same unquestioned assumption that better computers will necessarily substitute for human workers. But this premise is fundamentally flawed. Computers are not our substitutes, they are our complements. The anxiety stems from a historical misunderstanding. Over the last few decades, the globalizing economy taught us a harsh lesson about substitution. When international trade barriers fell, professionals in developed nations suddenly found themselves competing with a vast global supply of overseas labor willing to perform the same tasks for a fraction of the cost. We learned that human workers across the globe really do compete with one another for the exact same jobs and the exact same finite resources. Whether a worker lives in the Eastern Hemisphere or the Western Hemisphere, they share the exact same fundamental desires. They want secure housing, access to energy, higher quality food, and greater prosperity. As the world develops, the convergence of these desires creates intense competition. We have unconsciously projected this traumatic experience of human-to-human globalization onto the rise of digital technology, assuming that servers and algorithms are simply the next wave of foreign labor coming to take our livelihoods. Computers, however, are categorically different. Men and machines are good at fundamentally different things. Human beings possess intentionality. We can form complex plans, understand subtle contextual clues, and make highly nuanced decisions in wildly unpredictable situations. We possess intuition, empathy, and the capacity for strategic foresight. We are, however, remarkably terrible at making sense of massive oceans of raw data. If you ask a human to manually review 10 million financial transactions to find a microscopic pattern of discrepancy, they will quickly succumb to exhaustion, boredom, and error. Computers are the exact opposite. They excel at efficient, relentless data processing, but they struggle to make the most basic common-sense judgments that a young child would find effortless. Furthermore, machines do not demand the same resources that we do. They do not want a luxurious home, they do not desire social status, and they do not consume agricultural products. They only require a nominal amount of electricity. Because we do not compete with them for resources, working with computers yields incredibly high gains without the friction of traditional human trade. They are the ultimate non-competing partner. Consider a vast global financial institution trying to defend itself against sophisticated digital theft. If the institution relies entirely on human analysts to manually review every single transfer, the sheer volume of global traffic will overwhelm them instantly. In response, modern engineering teams usually attempt to automate the solution entirely, writing rigid software algorithms designed to catch and block the theft without human intervention. But this purely automated approach always fails. The digital thieves are highly adaptive human beings. The moment they realize a software rule is blocking them, they creatively change their tactics, bypass the algorithm, and continue stealing. The software cannot adapt because it lacks human intentionality. The only way to achieve invulnerability is through a profound symbiosis of man and machine. You must build a hybrid system where the vast computing power processes billions of transactions in real time, instantly flagging the most bizarre statistical anomalies. The machine then feeds those highly curated anomalies directly into a brilliantly designed visual interface, where an elite human analyst can apply intuition, contextual reasoning, and strategic judgment to make the final decision. The machine handles the scale, the human handles the strategy. Together, they create a defensive architecture that neither could ever achieve alone. Yet the modern ideology of computer science is entirely obsessed with substitution. The trendiest academic fields and corporate research divisions focus on machine learning and artificial intelligence, explicitly trying to train computers to replace human effort task by task. This obsession is driven by an insatiable, misguided appetite for big data. Companies hoard mountains of information, believing that feeding algorithms enough data will eventually unlock profound insights and eliminate the need for human strategy. But big data is usually dumb data. Computers can find statistical patterns, but they cannot interpret complex human behaviors or compare patterns from completely different, unrelated contexts. Actionable insight can only come from a human mind. We have allowed ourselves to become enchanted by the illusion of independent machines because we exoticize technology. When a supercomputer beats a grandmaster at a highly structured board game, we view it as a dark omen of our impending obsolescence. But we ignore the fact that the machine does not even know it is playing a game, nor does it feel the joy of victory or the sting of defeat. The most valuable businesses of the coming decades will not be built by entrepreneurs who try to make people obsolete. They will be built by creators who ask, how can computers help humans solve incredibly hard problems? Think of the most complex, deeply human professions today: lawyers, doctors, teachers. A brilliant physician must combine vast clinical knowledge with the delicate ability to communicate a terrifying diagnosis to a vulnerable patient. A masterful teacher must understand the rigid mechanics of a subject and tailor their emotional delivery to the unique learning style of 30 different children. Computers will never be able to combine these nuanced, empathetic tasks. Better technology will not replace these professionals. It will empower them to do things they could never achieve alone. We may eventually face the distant cosmic question of super-intelligent machines that eclipse human capacity on every dimension. We may one day have to reckon with an artificial intelligence that can design its own successors and fundamentally rewrite the laws of our universe. but that is a worry for the next century. Today, allowing indefinite fears of a science fiction dystopia to paralyze our ambition is a catastrophic mistake. We must reject the fear of substitution and embrace the immense power of complementarity. The machine is not our rival. It is the greatest tool we have ever created, waiting for us to pick it up and build a reality that was previously unimaginable. Chapter 9. The 7 Pillars of Innovation. There is a powerful and seductive illusion that occasionally grips the business world. The belief that if a societal problem is massive and urgent, any endeavor attempting to solve it is destined to succeed. We saw this phenomenon unfold spectacularly at the dawn of the 21st century, when a global consensus emerged regarding the desperate need for alternative sustainable energy. The environmental urgency was undeniable, and in response, a massive wave of capital and ambition flooded into the market, aiming to completely cleanse the world's power grids. Yet, despite the billions of dollars invested and the universal applause of society, the vast majority of these ambitious enterprises ended in catastrophic bankruptcy. They failed because they confused a widespread social imperative with a sound business strategy, completely ignoring the unforgiving physics that govern human enterprise. To survive and build something of lasting value, you cannot rely on the sheer virtue of your mission. You must rigorously interrogate your own creation using 7 fundamental questions which serve as the load-bearing pillars of any monumental innovation. If you neglect even one of these pillars, you are inviting misfortune. If you ignore all of them, as so many forgotten visionaries have done, you are not building a company, you are simply hoping for a miracle. The first pillar is the engineering question. Can you create a true exponential breakthrough, or are you merely offering an incremental improvement? Many aspiring creators fall in love with a product that is perhaps 20% more efficient than the status quo when tested in the pristine isolation of a laboratory. But the real world is chaotic and full of friction. By the time a marginal improvement navigates the complexities of manufacturing, shipping, and user adoption, that slight advantage is completely erased. To overcome the inertia of human habit and command the market's attention, your technology must be an order of magnitude, at least 10 times, better than its closest substitute. The second pillar is the timing question. Is this the precise historical moment to launch your specific endeavor? Entering a massive, slow-moving industry can be an exceptional strategy, but only if you possess a definitive, realistic plan to suddenly overtake it. Many failed creators look at a stagnant industry and assume that its very sluggishness means it is ripe for disruption, without noticing that the underlying technological landscape has not yet shifted enough to support a revolution. You must honestly assess whether the world is actually ready to support your leap forward. The third pillar is the monopoly question. Are you starting with a dominant share of a small, highly concentrated market? During the great rush to build alternative energy, executives would routinely stand in front of investors and boast about entering trillion-dollar global markets, as if the sheer size of the ocean guaranteed them a profitable catch. This is a fatal misunderstanding of competition. Massive markets are synonymous with ruthless, bloodthirsty warfare. If you frame your enterprise as a tiny player in an impossibly large arena, you will be eaten alive. You must begin by monopolizing a distinct, narrow niche before you even attempt to expand outward. The fourth pillar is the people question. Do you have the absolute right team for the unique challenge ahead? In the wreckage of collapsed industries, you will often find that the failed companies were led by polished executives in beautifully tailored suits. They were phenomenal at generating publicity, securing government subsidies, and delivering grand speeches, but they were entirely incapable of building a product that actually worked. True technological pioneers rarely dress like slick professional salespeople. Their obsession is channeled entirely into the machine they are building, not the reflection in the mirror. You must surround yourself with builders, not just talkers. The fifth pillar is the distribution question. Do you have a seamless mechanism to not just create but actually deliver your product into the hands of the consumer? It is a common tragedy to see a brilliant piece of engineering fail because the customer is forced to jump through a labyrinth of logistical nightmares just to use it. If your creation requires an exhaustive behavioral change from the user, paired with an endless gauntlet of bureaucratic approvals, the inherent brilliance of the technology will not save you. Distribution must be as elegantly designed as the product itself. The sixth pillar is the durability question. Will your market position be defensible 10 or 20 years into the future? You cannot plan your enterprise based solely on the world as it exists today. You must anticipate the invisible threats waiting over the horizon. Many of the forgotten energy startups were completely annihilated because they assumed the price and availability of traditional fossil fuels would remain static forever. When new, cheaper extraction methods suddenly flooded the market, the startups had no defensive strategy. You must build an architecture that expects and withstands the evolution of your rivals. The seventh and perhaps most profound pillar is the secret question. Have you identified a unique hidden opportunity that the rest of the world does not see? The enterprises that crash spectacularly almost always justify their existence using the exact same conventional truths that everybody else is repeating. They chase the safety of the crowd. But a genuinely great company is always built upon a specific, unmapped reality. This brings us to the profound danger of attempting to blend philanthropy with commerce. The illusion of social entrepreneurship suggests that you can easily achieve massive financial success while chasing universally praised conventional goals. But when you pursue a goal that is universally applauded, you inevitably end up producing the exact same undifferentiated product as 100 other companies. True progress, the kind that actually elevates society, is rarely met with immediate applause. It comes from possessing the courage to do something entirely different, quietly solving a massive problem that the rest of the world has completely overlooked. Chapter 10. The Creators and the Cosmos. If you look closely at the individuals who actually build the future, you will notice something deeply unsettling. They are rarely normal. Human traits usually follow a standard bell curve where the vast majority of people cluster safely in the middle: moderately agreeable, moderately successful, moderately predictable. But if you were to plot the traits of those who create revolutionary enterprises, the curve would invert completely. The individuals who forge new realities exist at the absolute wildest extremes of the human spectrum. They are walking contradictions. It is astonishingly common to find a pioneering creator who is simultaneously a penniless outcast sleeping on a laboratory floor and a billionaire on paper wielding the power of a multinational CEO. They oscillate between infuriating stubbornness and mesmerizing charisma, functioning simultaneously as ultimate insiders and alienated outsiders. This extreme nature triggers a powerful, almost mythological cycle. Because these individuals are genuinely different, the world notices their eccentricities and begins to wildly exaggerate them. The creator, realizing that their strange persona grants them leverage and mystique, leans into the exaggeration. Imagine a brilliant, uncompromising aerospace engineer who decides to reinvent commercial flight. She begins as a total outsider, living out of a converted van to fund her prototype, completely ignored by the massive aerospace conglomerates. She possesses an abrasive, obsessive personality, working 100-hour weeks and demanding impossible perfection from her small team. When her revolutionary, hyper-efficient engine actually works, the media descends. They do not just report on her engine, they mythologize her. They crown her the undisputed sovereign of the new skies. They obsess over her strange dietary habits, her refusal to wear standard business attire, and her intense, unblinking stares. She realizes that this eccentric reputation terrifies her rivals and captivates investors, so she actively cultivates it. She becomes a living legend, an icon of progress. But there is a dark, ancient undercurrent to this type of worship. In primitive societies, whenever a community faced a devastating plague or an uncontrollable internal conflict, the tension would threaten to tear the society apart. To survive, the community would find a single, extraordinary individual upon whom they could place the entire blame for their misfortune: a scapegoat. The chosen scapegoat was a paradoxical figure, simultaneously the weakest member of the society, because they were powerless to stop their own sacrifice, and the most powerful because their sacrifice alone could restore peace. Before they were destroyed, these individuals were often dressed in fine garments, feasted and worshipped as living deities. The roots of modern royalty lie in this archaic ritual. Every ancient king was essentially a living god and a murdered scapegoat whose execution had merely been delayed. We execute this exact same ritual today with our modern creators and cultural icons. We elevate them to the status of royalty, hanging on their every word and treating their eccentricities as proof of their divine genius. But the moment the cultural mood sours, or the moment their enterprise stumbles, the adulation instantly turns into a bloodthirsty demand for their destruction. Our brilliant aerospace engineer will inevitably experience a delayed launch or a massive structural failure in a prototype. When she does, the same public that crowned her will suddenly declare her a dangerous, unhinged fraud. Her eccentricities, once viewed as the endearing marks of a visionary, will be weaponized against her as proof of her insanity. She will be dragged through the courts of public opinion, stripped of her authority, and ritually ousted from the very empire she built from nothing. Yet, when the uncompromising founder is removed and replaced by a team of highly credentialed, perfectly normal professional managers, the enterprise almost always stagnates. The professionals will optimize the accounting, smooth out the rough edges, and ensure perfectly polite board meetings. But they cannot invent the next revolution. The impersonal bureaucracy can maintain the inherited success for a long time, but it operates with a tragically short time horizon. The creation of entirely new value cannot be reduced to a polite, risk-free formula applied by a committee. We desperately need the abrasive, singular vision of the founder. We need individuals who are strange enough to believe they can bend reality to their will, because they are the only ones who actually do. The stakes of this strange human dynamic extend far beyond the walls of any single company. They dictate the ultimate fate of our species. When we zoom out and look at the cosmic trajectory of humanity, we are faced with 4 possible futures. The first is recurrent collapse, the ancient belief that history is a never-ending, tragic cycle of prosperity followed by devastating ruin. Given the resilience of modern knowledge, a total collapse back into the Dark Ages seems unlikely, but it haunts our collective memory. The second is the plateau, a future where the entire globe simply converges on the current living standards of the developed world. In this scenario, the future looks exactly like the present, just spread out a little further. But a plateau is a dangerous illusion. In a world with finite resources, a global plateau means intense, ruthless competition for every drop of water and every joule of energy. Without new technological breakthroughs to relieve that pressure, a stagnant plateau will inevitably erupt into massive global conflict. That conflict leads directly to the third possible future, absolute extinction. Given the devastating power of modern weaponry, a global struggle over dwindling resources could easily end the human story forever. In that scenario, there is no future left to discuss. This leaves only the fourth and most difficult path, the vertical takeoff. This is the future where we aggressively create new technologies so powerful that they transcend the current limits of our understanding, propelling humanity into a radically better, unimaginable reality. We cannot sit back and assume that this triumphant future will automatically happen on its own. The future is not a promise. It is a profound responsibility. We face a stark, defining choice between nothing and something. To avoid the gravity of stagnation and the abyss of extinction, we must embrace the strange, uncompromising creators among us. We must demand the freedom to think for ourselves, to look at the world as fresh and unmapped as the ancients once did, and to boldly architect the miracles that will sustain us. The universe, our planet, and the fleeting moments of our lives are entirely singular. It is up to us to reject the crowded, horizontal paths of the past and take the impossible vertical leap from 0 to 1.